you and I tonight, huh?
Well, that one is on a video conference.
Hmm. We okay? How's that?
Ready to go?
Yeah. Okay. We're back to chapter 9 of the Avatamsaka Sutra. And we're continuing with the verse text that we had last week. The 4 lines basically go: living beings, lacking wisdom, are injured and poisoned by the thorn of love. What is the Buddha Dharma for? Could be question mark. To cause those people to seek Bodhi, or to maybe induce, or to guide people as they seek for Bodhi. The causing here can have a number of different ways of rendering it in English, but basically to stimulate, to guide, to bring about, help people realize Bodhi. And we're talking about, it's a very rich segment of text here. And really, to some degree, this is really at the heart of this particular teaching, I would say the Buddha Dharma. If you wanted to see it in terms of almost a restatement of the Four Noble Truths, the injured and poisoned by is dukkha, classically. And that would be the first truth. The cause of the second truth is talking about the cause of the origins of that suffering, that disappointment, that lack of fulfillment, the angst. And that would be what's called here the thorn of love, which would be, in the second truth, desire, craving, a combination of what's called the vidya and trishna, thirst and not seen. And that's the not seen would be the living beings without wisdom, or lacking wisdom. So this would also fit into the second truth. So this is very rich, if you think about it. It's an Avatamsaka way of rendering the 4 truths. And then the third truth is that there's an end to that. There is a way to get out of that entrapment of disappointment, never getting what one seeks, being apart from things that matter and are meaningful, and so forth. And that's called Bodhi. It's called awakening. So that's in that last line. And then the path to accomplish that is what is the Buddha Dharma for? So the Buddha Dharma then would be the fourth truth. So right within here, that's why I'm saying this is so quintessential. It's an Avatamsaka rendering of the four truths. And what we might want to try to do tonight is to unpack it beyond just that sort of statement of truths, because these truths don't mean that because the Buddha spoke them, these are truths, capital T, but rather what these truths mean are somewhat statements of the obvious. These are declarations of things that are said to be evident, facts of life, and not so much Buddhist truths. So if we go down here, I would say then, if we're going to do a psychodynamic translation of this in the first line, the Wu in the living beings, see if I can call up if I have the Chinese here. Hang on a second, I'm just going to bring up the actual Chinese verse of this. Oh, you should be nervous because now I'm going to do Chinese, and that could be a source of concern. And I'm going down and looking at these first verse. Yeah, and you have Wu, Zhi Hui. Zhi Hui is the wisdom, and then the Wu. You could translate as lacking wisdom, but I don't think this is what it means. I think because if you understand this teaching really deeply, the wisdom that's being referred here is not something we lack. It's just something we're not using. And there's a very big difference between the sense of you don't have it and you're not using it. In fact, this is core to this teaching is it is only possible for one to get out of this dukkha, the satisfaction, and attain the joy, the even-mindedness, the kindness, the compassionate sensibility of bodhi, is only possible because it's already innate and inherent. That's what is the Buddha Dharma for? It's to allow one to activate, I want to use that word rather than to get, to activate that inherent wisdom. In fact, my teacher really said the heart of the teachings is nothing more than activating our inherent wisdom. And that's why it's a teaching, because it's giving you methods or methodologies or tools, not for seeking wisdom from, say, an external agent or the divine, but activating it right within your own being. So I would say here, the Wu, wisdom would be almost like living beings not using their wisdom rather than lacking it. So then we get into what we were talking about last week, the thorn of love, and I want to present this. This is very, very subtle. There's a lot to go into on this. The translation of it as love, at least in the Chinese, is a bit fraught because in the Chinese, the character, trying to think what the tone is for I. Let's see. I. Is it a fourth tone?
I.
Fourth tone.
Eventuation.
Yeah. I. It's a fourth tone. By the way, if you have the text online, you can see what I'm squinting at, which is in the pinyin, which is on the left below the Chinese characters. There's little tiny marks on my screen. They're almost like specks you'd rub up with a cloth. But depending on which direction they're going, they give you the tone, which is for pronunciation only because you have the benefit of seeing the actual characters above. However, if the Chinese characters weren't above, then you could have the romanization, and without the tones, you still not necessarily figure out what it is, but you'd be closer. Because there's probably a lot of characters with I as fourth tone that means more than just love. Anyhow, I digress. As I was saying, in the Chinese, this is used across a range. And I think in the Buddhist thing, too, I want to present this. And I mentioned last week, it can mean everything from ribald uncontrolled lust to something more mild like romantic infatuation to, or attraction, or it can get into deep attachments, even to obsession. It can also be used to describe, say, love of country, which would be something we call patriotism it can be used to describe in Chinese characters with something else, meaning outgoing, gregarious, engaged. The aihao expression means to take care of oneself, to look after one's health. It can be used to render to cherish and support, for tenderness, say between mother and child, or friends. It also can be used for aesthetics, the aesthetic sensibility. So then you have aimei, meaning sort of what is beautiful, or what I would say is calmly harmonious, as in music or art forms. And even I used it last week to say it also can refer to treasuring or loving time, but loving time in the sense of using time well. So in this sense would be meaning the day for the sun character. And so it means loving the sun, but it doesn't mean you love the sun. What it means, and the way it's usually used in text, is it's an attitude you have to recognizing the preciousness of human life and using it well. In this case, particularly to serve one's parents and to think about how it is that my relationship with others is taking care of myself, taking care of others. And that's to, in a sense, maybe from the Latin sense of carpe diem, which means to seize or to take the time, grab hold of the moment, the time. Sometimes this is mistranslated as eat, drink, and be merry, which is really not the only or the primary meaning of carpe diem. Carpe diem has to do with really attend to the here and now and take charge, because this is really all you have. And it also can be used in a smaller sense of aishao, meaning literally love small, love of the small, which the classic texts always refer to as some sort of overwhelming greed for self-benefit and narrow-mindedness. Can be reversed. You can put a character like Ren, which is the Confucian virtue of, some people translate it benevolence or humaneness. It's a character of a standing person next to two strokes. And some people say, well, that's how people should be with each other. That's okay. I mean, that's not bad. The ancient bone oracles, where this first appears in some of the earliest texts, actually this character also is seen depicting a pregnant woman. And so it's a person, and the two is rendered, and meaning the very first basis of our humanity and caring is the mother-child relationship. This is the foundational. So that universal love for humankind begins with this nurturing between the mother and child, but it can mean this broad love as opposed to now the obsessive narcissistic love, although I is in both of those. So you see I shall, which is then the small-minded me and mine and all I want is self-benefit, and then you have ren I, and that's the universal love for humanity. So what I'm trying to point out here is not just that I can be used in many different ways, but it could be seen, and I'm going to make a case for this tonight, I'm trying to, that at least in the Buddhist text, there is this nature, it's called the xing, or zixing, the self-nature, which is said to be replete with all the virtues and all the characteristics of wisdom and awakening. But that nature can go south. It can ascend. When rightly tended, using that nature well, it ascends, and you move along a spectrum where sort of maybe the primal I transmutes, becomes refined, becomes something moving from passion to compassion, and moving from self-centeredness or narrow love to kinship, kindness, where kindness comes from, and so forth. And what I'm suggesting here from the text, the Buddhist text, it's a single substance. This substance is one substance. It manifests in many forms. And again, then what cultivation has to do with using the wisdom is to take this substance, I guess it would be tea, the Chinese character tea, and work with it so that you actually transform it, you refine it, you cultivate it away from just grasping and attaching, which it means here, to something that on the reverse of that is bodhi, awakening, and compassion. So this is really important because not only is the character indicating that range of possibilities, but it's interesting because I appears through all of those. So it's sort of like I can have that range of meanings. And to me, this is very interesting. I'm going to suggest, too, that this also appears in the Western tradition, at least among the Greeks. So here, as it's used in this verse here at the beginning, talking about it in terms of the poison injuring thorn, that's generally in the Buddhist sense, that's gun. And really what that means is referring to the root, gun being root, root love, which is the most base, coarse, unrefined, I guess in the Freudian sense, you'd say something closer to the id. And that is what produces afflictions. It's sort of the root cause. In this sense, we're using it in the Four Noble Truths sense of the second one. Aigan, meaning the root, the cause, the origins is this craving. I'll give you a passage here. This is from Master Hanshan when he was writing an essay, a letter actually, called from the section of his writings called Wandering in a Dream. And he's responding to an individual who wrote him and asked, what's the essence of cultivating this way? He was very impressed with Hanshan. He met him while doing famine relief in China. And Hanshan begins his essay. He says, you've asked about the meaning of the causes and conditions of the great matter. And that's what he says Buddhism is about, this one great matter. Two ways of rendering it. The one great matter is this potential that all of us have for Buddhahood, or for Buddha, small b if you will. And that is why the teachings exist, to activate, to stimulate that. That's the one great matter. The one great matter also has to do with the meaning or the use of one's life, that there is a short time we have between the time we come in and the time we go out. And the great matter is, what are we to do with that interval between birth and death? And so this is sort of philosophically the great matter people always ask is, if I'm born only to die, what am I to make of this time then that's allotted to me? So both of these one great matter would be okay here. He says, first of all, and now he begins his essays, first of all, Buddha nature, the nature of Buddha, and he's using it now, he's interpreting the great matter as your human potential is the great matter, is innate and whole within all of us. Okay? Present here and now. So it's innate and whole, it's present here and now. That's why I don't like to translate it lacking wisdom. It's basically whole, innate, present here and now, and lacking nothing. This is really important. So this psychologically is really critical to this teaching and what Hanshan is saying. This wholeness that we have, our innate wholeness, is not lacking. Most of modern psychology and a lot of modern behavior is driven by what a Buddhist would call the misunderstanding, the misperception that we lack, that we're insufficient. That sense of insufficiency, of incompleteness, leads to a kind of insecurity. That insecurity then leads to a anxiety, and that anxiety then, not desire, but the anxiety then leads to desire to fill the sense of lack, and thus begins this, sort of rolling down the hill, or being spooked into a frantic activity, what Sixth Patriarch calls a frantic passage through life, driven by the sense that our tails are on fire, so to speak. And our tails are on fire because we got to get to what we're lacking. And yet, no matter how much we get, we never feel satisfied. Because the searching for it outside actually fuels the insecurity and feeling of absence. Moreover, if we got something that might fulfill momentarily, we would not feel the anxiety go away because we knew it was coming from the outside, therefore conditioned, therefore impermanent, and therefore increasing more lack. So you can see psychologically how sophisticated this is. And reverses this by saying, no, it's whole and complete. Therefore, do not search outside. Therefore, don't get anxious and stressed out. But return the light to illumine within. Seek the fullness of yourself, the fullness of your original nature. And then he says, but, however. So it's whole and complete, present here and now, lacking nothing, however. And this is always like, if you could end that first one and say, okay, fine, but there's a however. And the however is since beginning this time. He doesn't say it's a beginning, and then there's a middle and there's an end. He doesn't say in the Garden of Eden at the beginning. He doesn't use this. He says without beginning, without end. It's just ongoing, continuous. Deeply rooted seeds of craving, and that's eigen. That's how we translate it. Deeply rooted seeds of craving is eigen. That's where it appears. Deluded thinking, emotional anxiety, and ingrained habits have all polluted and obscured its wondrous brightness. Thus, we cannot realize its full expression. This is really a beautiful passage of text going into sort of explicating this passage. The polluting and obscuring you could equate with the thorn section here where it talks about injured and poison. So the injured and poison is seen in a sort of maybe chemical way at one level, and then obscure and polluted has a little blend of both. So poison pollutes and so forth. And by the way, this is also the pollution, or the idea of polluted in these texts, is also another translation of klesha, the afflictions, phanna. So this is really very, very rich. There's a lot buried in here. And so Hanshan goes in, he says, and as a result of that, we labor ever confined within states of body and mind, mere shadows of our deluded thinking, chasing after this, chasing after that, and so forth. And so he's basically saying, if we can stop this mental activity, these deluded thoughts, and by thoughts he means also psychological impulses and urgings that are driven by not seeing things correctly. They're so closely interconnected, thought and action, feelings and intellect, as to be non-dual in these teachings. We talk about them as if they're dual, but in reality, we don't experience them as dual. We don't experience them as dual. Often, actually, thought follows right on the heels of emotion and feelings. It doesn't precede it. But it's so close. But if it precedes it so quickly that we can't distinguish between this thought and the feeling that follows. And so you can't really think about, I'm going to analyze this philosophically. That's not sufficient. That will help. That'll give you some clear principle. But the actual psychodynamic way this works, 99% of what we're doing is feeling, emotion, reaction, impulse. That is supported by, undergirded by, rationalized by thought. But you're not going to think your way out of this mess. I'm sorry. So, you got to get at it to this level that says, if you do that, if you confront this and deal with it, your true mind will naturally manifest as if you were polishing a mirror. Again, the mirror is whole and complete. It's not lacking. Just simply polish off the dust and it brightens again. And same way, he goes in the same way, once our defilements, or you could say pollution, or the poison and toxicity that's mentioned in this verse, once that is removed, our bright wisdom will shine forth. And here again, it will shine forth. It won't come to us. It won't be infused into us, or it won't be given to us, or bestowed upon us. It just comes forth. So this is psychologically a very different orientation, because then all wanting and all getting is actually what the Shrangma calls adding a head on top of a head. It's actually becomes an impediment. And he says this is what the Dharma is all about. Now look back to the verse we just had. What is the Buddha Dharma all about? What is it for? To do this. So Hanshan and the Four Noble Truths all can work through and in this verse. Really quite wonderful. So as I mentioned, I could tell by some of the responses last week that a lot of people are interested in this topic of love. And I don't know if you're interested in the way I'm going to talk about it, but at least you're interested in it. So you might think tonight it's going to be a really fun lecture on love. You may go away saying, oh, that sucked, man. You know, he didn't talk about what I wanted to hear, which was, how do I find my love? And I'm sorry, but if you're looking for your love, you will never find it. I'm just interpreting the text here. At the place of seeking nothing, there is no worry. Of the place of seeking love, not seeking love, compassion arises by itself. Anyhow, in an interesting way, the Greeks, and I was telling you the story when I was at university, and I had my professor, my Greek classics professor, asked us, we were 19, 20 at the time, what was on our minds? It was love. Love was on our minds. And he said, and for the Greeks too. And we thought, what do the Greeks know about love? And he says, what do you think you know about love? And we gave a very, love is the boy, girl, happy ever after kind of thing. And he says, oh, how absolutely pathetic. he says, it's like entering a flower shop and all you take out is, what's the yellow,
flowers.
The
Plastic
yellow
flowers.
weed kind of.
Oh, daffodils?
No, the yellow, it's a weed. And as yellow, we used to rub it on our cheeks to make them yellow. Huh? Anybody, Locke, you know what that is?
Yellow weed?
It's a weed.
Wait about 30 seconds, somebody online will tell us.
Come on, what is it? I forgot what he called it. It's so common. Somebody online know this? It's a yellow weed that grows in the spring, and when you let it go, it turns to seed, and you blow it, and it just all floats away, all the little specks float. Dandelion. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, dandelion. Whew. Actually, the teeth of the lion is what it means, which is interesting. I don't know the etymology of it, but and anyway, he says you go into this wonderful flower shop, and you come out with a dandelion. And he said, then we got interested. What did the Greeks have to say about love? So then he went through. I've just shared some of his. He said, first of all, they talked about it as eros. The first kind of love is eros, which is intimate physical love, but it's also a little broader in that it's the creative energy for art and science. So eros is what gives rise not only to physical, emotional love, but also it's the creativity behind art and science. But then there's another level called philia, which is spelled P-H-I, philia, and that's friendship. And it's between friends of all kinds, and it's more of an affectionate love, if you could say, or an affectionate regard. And to some extent, it's also what people then mean by Platonic love, taken from Plato's idea of a love without physical attraction. So it's more of a love for the person as a person and not as an object of your desire or a satisfaction of your sensual desires. That's the second level. Then there's a third level called agape. And this is closer to the Chinese. I was doing the Zhen Ai, the humane broad love. And this is a love of humanity and our fellow living beings. Agape also means, interestingly, empathetic love. Able to see in another being a creature as frail and as easily hurt as ourselves. This is really interesting. In Latin, it's caritas, which from that comes the word charity. And so you can see this is agape. There's also a fourth kind. I mean, I'm just sort of going over what I remember from this class. I remember a lot because love seemed to be like, you can ask me other things I forgot, but I remember. But I also remember this because it was so exciting at the time to feel the nuance of what the classics could give. Storge, S-T-O-R-G-E. And that's the tender care and affection between parents and children. And interestingly, between grandparents and grandchildren. So this storge is a very interesting love. It's not passionate. It's not even Platonic. It actually has emotion and feeling behind it, but it is not sensual, it's not carnal, it's not possessive. And it also describes the proper relationship between a student and teacher. So grandparents and grandchildren, parents and children. But storge is also about what a teacher and student have. And then they go further in this. They have what's called mania, or mania, which we get the words manic in English. But this is when this love then turns into obsession. It tips, and it goes past the point of balance and harmony, either whether it's philia, eros pushed to the extreme, then becomes mania. But also, I would say you could, between the parents and the children, if you push storge too far, it tips into mania, which becomes obsessive. And then you see the children as yours, and that they represent you, and what they do is all about your accomplishments or unfulfilled realization and so forth. You can see they had this idea, the Greeks had this idea, there's very kinds of categories of love, but you have to be careful. So then, from their point of view, this would lead to stalking behaviors, this mania, to codependency, to extreme jealousy, obsessive jealousy, possessiveness. All are symptoms of mania, which is love deformed. And then love transformed is something we'd call compassion or agape. So this is very interesting, but it's the same rudimentary kind of thing. So what it's talking about within the human is this fundamental capacity that we call love. But then you can see in the Greeks and the Chinese how many variations of this. There's another kind of love called pragma, and this means enduring love, and that's a kind of love that outlasts the passion and infatuation. It's a commitment, it's an understanding and a long-term best interest of each. In some ways, it's what cultivators have for each other. Dharma friends have more pragma. It's a kind of love that has aged and matured through vows and through cultivation, to actually say, I want for that person what I want for myself. I want them to be liberated and free and to end suffering and become awakened. And then it's a relationship over time, and it shows patience and tolerance. That's pragma. Very interesting. There's also, they were very well at something called philautia, which is basically self-love. And again, we have the idea of Narcissus. There was a cartoon I just saw in the New Yorker of Narcissus was by the water looking at his image. He said, "You'll have to excuse me now, I have to go. It's my me time." Talking to his image. It's very funny if you... Anyhow. But self-love doesn't mean what we think it means. So I want to pull back a little bit and say mania is the form of love that becomes obsessive. But philautia has to do with what I mentioned in the Chinese before when I said, what was it, aihao, taking care of oneself. So philautia actually in the Greek meant to order to care for others. In order to care for others, we must learn first to take care of ourselves. If we don't have this self-regard, if we see ourselves as arrogant and overbearing to others, or we see ourselves as inferior, we mistreat ourselves, we judge ourselves, we constantly get into, oh, I'm not worthy, and so on and so forth. This is not taking care. And if you're in that state of mind, you cannot take care of others. This is what, I mean, the Greeks are very, very keen on this. Aristotle said, all friendly feelings for others are an extension of a person's feelings for him or herself. All our feelings for others are an extension of, they're going out from the feelings we have of taking care of ourselves. So again, this idea that you can brutalize yourself, put yourself down, denigrate yourself and be a good friend or care for others is absolutely wrong. It's not going to work. But you could see how philautia with mania going to the far then becomes a kind of self-obsessed narcissistic, infatuation. Maybe I'll just do one more that I remember. One was the final one he talked about was xenia or xenia. And this is the basically the concept of how you treat strangers. It's hospitality. And has to do with literally guest friendship. The generosity and courtesy that are shown to those who come from afar, associates or friendships based on that. And this has become a big concept in the interfaith dialogue of the idea that we treat others with xenia, with hospitality as guests. So anyhow, these are just to go into this a little bit tonight to show that in both these traditions, whether it's the Chinese tradition or the Greek tradition, the one word love has this whole range of meanings and I would say expressions. But the way the text is talking about it tonight is really just about these craving, the personal, the narcissistic, the carnal, the unrefined, the raw, and that's aigun. And sometimes that gets translated as lust. So love then at that level becomes lust. Now, where I want to go with this tonight is I want to make some comment about then if this is the case, how this is expressed, then I is transformed, it's refined. It becomes in compassion and caring, it becomes bodhicitta, which is the resolve to have the awakening for all beings, not just myself. Untransformed, though, it collapses into narrow grasping and attaching, possessiveness, jealousy. Expanded, let go, as Hanshan says, take the pollution and coverings and obscurations off of it, it manifests as compassionate wisdom, both. So here you have the single substance, and depending on how we work with it and how we cultivate it, and this is where cultivation comes in, it can either go either way. It can go along a spectrum to the most brutal and selfish of human expression, and sometimes with mania gives rise to killing and ethnocentrism and so forth. Goes the other way, it's this uninhibited care and concern for all that lives. And that's where the Avatamsaka says a bodhisattva at this stage sees no difference between him and herself and all beings and all worlds. That's the ultimate wisdom, compassion expression of this when refined. So I mentioned this key verse in the Platform Sutra where it talks about this. And the Platform Sutra is wonderful in the sense that it's always talking dynamically. How do you work this? How do you activate this? Even when it seems to be stating principles, it's stating principles only as functioning mechanisms. So here it says lust, this kind of craving, actually stems from the pure nature. This is the verse. Just turn back lust, natural purity wholly restored. In other words, don't give in to that lust. And that now turn it back is different than repressing it. So this is very interesting. The turning I want to stress, because this is where the patriarch moves. Turning, 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 it comes out right, like the Quaker song. It's this nimbleness, and rather than thinking of it as a hinge, you think of it as a pivot. A pivot turns in many directions responsibly. The hinge only goes one way, this way or that way. So then he says, the third line, each of you within your own nature, let go of the five desires. Immediately see your nature, this is real and true. This is the verse from the patriarch, sixth patriarch. Lust actually stems from the pure nature. Turn back lust, natural purity wholly restored. Each of you within your own nature, let go of the five desires. Don't pick them up. Don't follow. Don't indulge. Let go. Not repress, not cut off. Simply don't yield to. And immediately you'll see your nature, the real and true. So, I'm trying to think if I want to. I'm going to talk a little bit, maybe if there's time tonight, on the biochemistry aspects of this. Because the neurohormonal science that's come out on this one issue is really fascinating, and I wanted to share some of that with you tonight. But instead of doing that immediately, because what I want to suggest to you is what we think is love and these feelings actually have a very precise an objective corresponding neural hormonal referent. And we can see this as it works through the body. And we can actually see through MRI and through various testing how I can go from one direction to a different direction, and it looks different. It looks different. So the neurochemical reference for this are really interesting. But also what it's pointing to is, because they're beginning to discover this, it's extremely powerful stuff. The neurotransmitters, the hormones, and the pathways, the neural pathways upon which this one thing, what we call I love, flows. It's almost humbling to realize how much we are controlled by those chemicals. We think I fall in love, I choose to, and so on. We are almost completely drunk and taken over once these chemicals flood our system. Now, cultivation is really interesting because what cultivation is saying, you can internally, through consciousness, through meditation, through precepts, actually get a handle on these neurotransmitters. It's not like you take, because you think, well, I'll just take some pills to count it. No. Because then you're externally reliant again. So part of your mindfulness in practice has to do not with zoning out, but with tuning in finely to when these hormones and neurotransmitters are actually activating in your system. And if you practice, you can viscerally be aware and feel this. Now, you can do this through technique. We can use what we call cognitive mechanism machines or biofeedback machines. You can use functional MRI, and you can use various blood work to show what is going on here. But in a sense, that doesn't really get you to the deep level you need to be in cultivation to actually be able to sense this in your own system as they arise. And while you sense it, the biofeedback mechanisms put on you would confirm that that's exactly what's going on. So this is very interesting, this interface. I'll say more about this later. But the method for doing this, mastering, subduing, regulating, refining, perfecting, accomplishing this raw stuff, is first you have to stop the yielding to it. You cannot just follow these impulses. This is what basically precepts do. They give you a ground, a little ground, to hold your space so that you're not completely swept away, that you have made choices. I'm not going to kill, I'm not going to steal, I'm not going to get, sexually hedonistic, I'm not going to lie and deceive, and I'm not going to get stoned. And that gives you a momentary ground from which you can then watch the arisal of these impulses from thoughts and from habits in your system and begin to get a handle. If you don't have a stopping, it's all over. So precepts is only beginning. Go ahead, you had a question.
So for instance, if this affection arise in the system, what you can recommend to do?
Affliction?
Affection.
Well, the first thing, make sure it's affection and not lust. Yeah. Often what we call affection is just a mask on lust. And a lot of gift giving, which seems to be humaneness, is really quid pro quo for, I give you this, you give me that in return. So we have to, the nuance you have to distinguish between lust and affectionate regard isn't just theoretical. You will have reference in your physical, emotional wherewithal, if you're sensitive, to know the difference. You know when you move as opposed to when you respond. I'm just saying, but people who aren't cultivating, this is pretty elusive. But once you start listening to yourself and you feel, when this thought arises, I can feel my blood flow differently. I can feel the heat in my body change. You become aware of other thoughts that follow that are corresponding to that. Are they pure or are they defiled? You can actually see a causal network operating with just one thought or feeling arising. This is why I would suggest for people who are interested in this, the Mango Stone Sutta that the Buddha gives to his son Rahula, it really explains in detail how mindfulness is attending to something before it arises, and then while it's arising, and even after you followed it or didn't, to observe what's going on. And if you observe what's going on, this leads to increased suffering, to harm, to the not the well-being of myself and others. You usually, if you're sharp, you can see it before it even arises. That's when habit becomes self-fulfilling, in the sense that because you've realized this, because you've seen this, you've changed your habits, you're no longer prone to but even if it does arise, you're so quick and responsive, you feel immediately in your system what the effect is. And I'm saying this is not mystical. This is something we all have, but we cover it over. We dumb it down. Precepts gives you a little bit of a ground to feel the fullness of those changes and transformations as your thoughts and feelings arise, because you're going to pause. And by pausing just for that moment, just that stopping, and contemplating and looking at that experience, that's where you get the existential mechanism to steer by. It's not about following the rules, and it's not about obeying a teacher. It's about listening to yourself carefully, thinking it over, feeling it, and asking, where's this going? Where's this coming from? Now, you can say, well, that's a lot of work. True, but it's a lot more work to let the horses out of the barn and then try to get them in afterwards. Growing up on a farm, I know that's the case. So better to have a gate and make sure you got mastery over that gate. So the first step, of course, is this stopping. And, you could look at it as Jirguan, as Shamatha Vipassana. But I'm talking about precepts here, because you can't get a handle unless you don't yield to it and indulge it. You have no harness. That doesn't mean you're there. Although that's necessary, it's still not sufficient. But if you don't stop it, you're not even at the necessary stage. But, and this is really critical, nor is it repression. Very different. You don't indulge it. That's part of the stopping. But you don't want to stop it in the sense of think stopping is repressing it, because you can't repress it. You can only transform it. Repressing it is actually feeding it, and it will grow. It'll get worse, and it'll get weird. So you'll never see, I don't see any Buddhist text, any teaching. I see turning, transformation, change, adaptation, responsiveness, cultivation. I don't see repression. Repression doesn't work. So these first steps of actually repression isn't transformation, it's malformation. It malforms this. And I mentioned Freud's concept. This is part of what he meant by the return of the repressed. It doesn't go away, it comes back. So you don't indulge, you don't repress. What you're doing in cultivation is observing this rise and fall. You observe how these things come and go. And because they have no nature of their own, all these feelings, all these impulses are momentary stirrings. They're like little puffs of wind that if you have no sail up, it won't move you. And you just sort of observe and watch it rise and fall and come and go, and you realize, oh my gosh, this is another conditioned dharma. If you indulge it, and I maybe go over this next week a little more, the hormonal neurotransmitter thing that happens, you won't be able to get a handle on this. I mean, this is very clear. But you can control it. And once you do, those neurotransmitters, hormones, ping dong, they're not gone, but they're in harmony. And when they work in harmony, this actually then releases, it gives you the taste of liberation and freedom, what we call vimutti magga, the taste of freedom and liberation. This is actually a text. There's Visuddhi Magga, but there's also a text called Vimutti Magga describing the liberation and joy and freedom that comes from mastering, not indulging and not repressing this. And that's where I would say sometime we'll go over the mango stone again, because it's really describing in detail how you'd actually do this. So I would say it's something to the effect of what the patriarch was talking about earlier. If you don't follow those 5 desires, simply observe and watch and hold steady, natural purity restores itself. You don't have to seek it. It's there already. It's sort of like grass under concrete in the sense that the purity, the nature wants to come forth. And the concrete is the scoriations we put on it. But even concrete really thick, if you notice, I notice now that there's less traffic on my street, weeds and grass are going through the cracks. It wants to come up again. And so they have to go and pour the concrete and the asphalt over again to keep it. But the concrete, as the song goes, God bless the grass, it grows through the cracks. They pour the concrete over it and try to keep it back, klesha. But the concrete gets tired, fatigue, dukkha, of what it has to do. It breaks and it buckles, and the grass grows through. This is the nature wanting to come forth. So you don't have to pull the grass up. You just simply keep the cracks opening, keep the cracks opening. This is cultivation, breaking the concrete. So maybe that's probably enough maybe to say tonight, because I would, maybe next week I'll talk a little bit more about the neuro, if you're interested in that. Because I think it's actually quite interesting that in this particular way in neuroscience, you can see a very valuable tool for understanding how these emotions work and how we can work with them, and absolutely how powerful they are. But I think I'll just stop there tonight because, Jintuan, you're going to talk for a few minutes?
Okay, I can talk about
Yeah.
it. Actually, on this point,
Oh, okay.
actually.
And I'm sorry, everyone, if this wasn't what you were expecting for the love lecture.
Won't be too long, I guess. A few minutes. So for this topic, I thought of one story that comes from the Pali Canon. It's the Majjhima Nikaya 75. And it's the Buddha talking to a person named Magandiya. And it's very interesting because Magandiya is actually a kind of sensual hedonist. And he visits a Brahmin where the Buddha was staying, and he sees the Buddha has this little grass mat. He says, who's sitting there? And the Brahmin says, oh, that was the Buddha, the world-honored one. And the Magandiya goes, him? He's such a killjoy. He's... people want to enjoy life, and he says, don't follow your sensuality. He's just a real person who just destroys everyone's happiness. And then the Brahmin goes, probably shouldn't talk about the Buddha like that. He says, no, he's really and says, okay, how about when the Buddha comes back, you can speak with him. So it's very interesting. Magandiya actually has a conversation with the Buddha, and the Buddha's conversation with Magandiya is, okay, Magandiya, you want to enjoy the senses. Let me ask you, if you had the pleasures of the heavens, and the Buddha talks about the heavens being extremely blissful, you have this celestial palace, you have all these people you enjoy, that you like, you have music, you have, good things to eat, everything, fine clothes. Compare that to the joys you have now. Which one would you like? Of course, the heavens, it's beautiful there, it's wonderful. That's so much better. Would you want any of the joys you have now? No, this stuff would just be like garbage. I wouldn't want this. He says, okay, well, Magandiya, that the joys that I have on this path is like compared to the heavenly joys that you just described, and then to like the heavenly joys to what you're experiencing in this kind of sensual world. And he describes, I know there's a joy, a delight that's apart from sensual pleasures, apart from unwholesome states, that far surpasses this divine bliss. He says, I'm not even interested in your sensuality. He says, I was a prince. I had a palace in the summertime. I had a palace in the springtime. In modern times, he was, very, you could say, successfully, hedonistically, had all the tools for it. He says, I gave it up, not because I didn't want it, it's because I saw, and this is actually when Marty talked about the Four Noble Truths, which I think is an interesting way to link it to this particular teaching, is that they say he saw sensuality, there's a gratification, there's a kind of an initial rush that you get from it, but he says, then I saw the danger of it, which is that it doesn't last, that oftentimes it has this kind of shadow side behind it. We get addicted, we get caught up in it. So because I saw the danger, and I looked for the escape. So that's essentially the Four Noble Truths, the noble truth of seeing how the sensuality actually leads to dukkha, the first, second Noble Truths, and then the escape is the third and fourth Noble Truth. So I actually had an exercise that I often do when we are in DRBU and also with groups, which connects with what Marty was just talking about being able to sense inside. Because the question is on how do you do this? And rather than having this be theoretical, I said, let's look at the two experiences of following sensuality and craving, this kind of, you could say maybe lust that Marty was talking about, versus the sense of letting go, of being content. And we do a kind of a chart, a physical manifestation of it in the body, what you feel viscerally, the emotional manifestations of it, and the conceptual manifestations. What are the thoughts in the mind? So maybe I'll just share that briefly, and I'll just conclude there. So I wrote down a list of what people have shared with me, and you can see what matches yourself. And I actually would recommend doing this exercise, after you meditate and you kind of calm down and you really reflect. What's the experience of craving like when I go inward? What's the experience of letting go? Because that develops an inner attunement to what's going on. So what I get is when we follow craving, there's heat in the body. The body gets hot. There's a kind of adrenaline buildup. There's a kind of tension in the body. There's a kind of excitement. The breath shortens. Somebody says the pupils enlarge. The body shakes a little bit. The body actually, he says the hips turn forward, the chest closes in, your shoulder rises up to your ears, you're going for something. He says that's the physical manifestation. He says emotional manifestation, well, you feel high, you feel confident, you feel invincible, you got excited, you got anticipation, you have kind of aroused, you're going for something. At the same time, you have another feeling of a lacking, like you're missing out on something, so you need to make up for that feeling. There's a kind of anxiety, maybe you won't get it. That's kind of part of the emotional element of that. And then the conceptual, I thought this was really fun. It says you have this inner negotiation. The lawyer mind comes, you should, it'll be good for you. It's really good. It says, just get the thing, just indulge yourself, relax, don't be so tough on yourself. One guy said, actually, it'll be good for your cultivation. You gotta relax a little bit sometimes, and then it'll be good for you. So this rational mind that just kind of comes in to kind of convince us, yeah, it's okay, just go for it, right? And then we went and compared to the other side of renunciation, letting go, a kind of simplicity. The breath becomes smooth, calm. The heart rate slows down. The body relaxes. The stomach relaxes. Oftentimes there's a light smile, right? They talk about the emotional manifestation. Often there's a sense of relief. There's a joyful feeling because you're feeling like I'm not trapped in desire. That Buddha actually gives an analogy that when we get free of sensuality, it's like somebody getting out of jail. There's a happiness that's like, I'm out of that. There's an inner peace. There's a dissolving of unwholesome emotion, a contentment. And then we talked a little about repression and restraint, but I won't go into that right now because I think it would be very interesting to do the same exercise for the experience of repression, so we can recognize that as well. And then he said, what's the conceptual manifestations in the mind? The thought goes, I don't need this. I'm satisfied. I have enough. There's a kind of clarity in the mind. There's often a lack of conceptual thinking. It's kind of an open, empty space in the mind where there's a feeling of I'm not caught up in my own narrative. The feeling, everything is okay, no problem. Another person said, I see you, Mara. Mara is the Buddhist, in the Buddhist cosmology, the demon king. But it's a sense of like, I know your tricks. I'm not going to follow you, right? It's not that you demonize Mara in the sense that he's evil and going to come harm you. It's like, I recognize you. I don't have to follow you. And another thought was, I don't want to harm myself or other people. Following this desire is like grabbing fire. It just hurts myself. So I thought that was really connected with what Marty was saying about how we know this sense inside if we really pay attention. And it's our choice. We want to follow this path to craving, which, if we use wisdom, sees it leading to suffering, dukkha, anxiety, and a lot of, attachment and potential harm. or do we want to find the path of freedom? And we have these markers immediately available to us that we can access. But it takes time to attune to that. So I wanted to share that with everyone, and to do that exercise for yourself, find some time, and so you can develop our own inner markers about what maybe leads to freedom and what leads to more entanglement. So let me just share that much.
It's important to understand, because I'm sure there's someone probably thinking, what's wrong with love? Why are you guys so, why are you so down on love? You don't get enough, or you've been burnt by it, or let me just say this. I think, at least for myself and most of the early disciples that came to study with my teacher, would not have stayed and would not have continued if there wasn't something really exquisitely fulfilling about this cultivation stuff. And I want to stress that if love delivered the same way and the same flavor and the same taste that this cultivation delivers, none of us would have stayed and cultivated. And so what I'm suggesting is, in the direct experience, once you get this, what Ajahn Chah calls the taste of liberation, the actual taste, the flavor, you won't be satisfied by any other taste. It's really like once you've tasted fresh fruit, and then you pick up a wax apple, you're not going to want that wax apple anymore. But it came from tasting the fresh fruit that you knew the waxed apple wasn't sufficient. So until you get some taste of this, you're not going to think that love is not ultimate. You're not going to think that there's something more. It's not a question of thinking, nor is it a question of guilt or shame. Oh, love is bad. It's actually very hedonistic, I must say. From my point of view, this stuff really delivers. And love delivers, but it doesn't deliver like this. And so it's sort of like, love's okay. But it can't match the freedom, the joy, the fullness, the almost sense of eternal youthfulness, a lightness of spirit that this surprisingly, seemingly renunciation, which it isn't actually, as liberation, delivers. So I want to really make this clear. You cannot pick this up as a should, as a moral injunction. I must, to be a good Buddhist, I have to put down life. No. This is all about what the Buddha says. Consider this and know for yourself. Know for yourself this flavor. If you don't know it for yourself, first of all, it's not the real flavor to begin with. And when you know for yourself, nobody's going to be able to dissuade you. But until you know for yourself, you're not have any authority to rely on. So tune into this and try it for yourself. When the Buddha says, ehi pasiko, consider this. Try this out. Because without that, you won't get it through should, you won't get it through repression, you won't say, I'm a good Buddhist and whatnot. You're only going to get it with that taste of freedom. And once that taste of freedom comes, if somebody says, don't be a Buddhist, you'd say, over my dead body. I don't even know what you mean by being a Buddhist, but I know what it means to be free and happy. And if you call that Buddhism, fine, I'm a Buddhist. But I'm not a Buddhist, and then I'm trying, no, got the order reversed. So for me, once you get in this path of freedom and liberation, and somebody says, you know what? What? You're a Buddhist. Really? I never thought of that. As opposed to, I'm a Buddhist and I should have peace and freedom. No. You got the horse and the cart completely mixed up. So I would say you got to come at this really existentially and try it. Really try it. And if it doesn't work, fine, go back to love and whatever that delivers. But you may be surprised at what. Anyhow, that's enough.
Maybe we should add another word before the word love, in the sense that it's a kind of obsessive love. It's a kind of entangling love, because as Marty just pointed out, love has so many meanings in the West. And there's a sense of loving kindness, which Marty talked about. Aristotle, one of the founders of Western thought, said it starts with this friendliness to yourself that extends to everyone. This is the actual definition of loving kindness, which is a very pure love, you could say. It's a wish for your own happiness and other people's happiness. It's a very mature emotion. If you can develop that place, which is actually a wise caring for yourself and other people, that's really liberating. And the Buddha said, go for that. That's wisdom. The craving one, I've tried it, it doesn't work. So he's just giving us our experience. So I think if we put another adjective in front of the word love, it's this obsessive love, this kind of enslaving love that I think all of us have some experience with, probably.
Actually, the Buddha had a wonderful expression. He said, this particular, the craving, lustful love, if there was another thing like it, no one would ever accomplish the way. So at this level, you have to get past that. And the only way you can get past that is giving yourself a space to feel and experience a transformation of that. If you don't give yourself that experience, it will forever have you in its thrall. So it's kind of interesting. But that's enough for tonight.
Yeah.
We'll pick up this next week. But I wanted to announce for everybody that we're going to have a memorial service for our Dharma brother, Paul Peterson, who passed away on the 9th of May. And that's going to take place this Sunday at 4 o'clock online. And Jinchuan, I hope, will explain it. But I think Locke was going to put the link out, so it's going to be a Zoom event because of COVID-19. We can't gather together. Some of us will be here to host it.
Okay, good.
But those of you who would like to attend, please do. There's going to be some ritual and ceremony, and then a chance and a slideshow. We have Paul's life, and then a chance for people to talk. Some of us, maybe 3 or 4 people, might formally say a few words, but then it'll be open for others to either talk in the hour we've allotted, and if you can't talk and say what you wanted to, we'll have a kind of chat box where you could write in and leave things, and then that could be seen by everybody later, and particularly passed along to the family. If you have, and I've been getting a lot this week from older students of Paul's with wonderful stories about what it was like when he was a teacher for them. So that's going to be coming up this Sunday. Junchuan, do you want to say more?
Yeah, so maybe just to give you a brief overview of what's going to be happening. Essentially, if people have gone to the 16,000 Buddhas, we have you could say, traditional rebirth ceremony that the monastery always does. We do that BBM quite frequently for those who are deceased. It begins with the incense praise. We recite the Heart Sutra 3 times. And then we do a series of mantras, rebirth, a kind of, you could say, an offering to helping the person transition, you could say. And then a dedication of merit with reciting the Buddha's name. So this is, in the Buddhist tradition, one way to transfer the care, maybe some people have the grief, the emotions, and also, the wholesome emotions of wanting to help for that person to transition on. Because in Buddhism, I don't know if we talked about any of these lectures, but death isn't seen as the end; it's seen as a moment of transition. And so, for all of us to gather together and recite and have wholesome thoughts dedicated to Paul, in the Buddhist tradition, is seen as that person's only praying and hoping that good people will do that for him to help him in his transition. So we'll do that, followed by a series of talks. Reverend Heng Sure will speak because he actually spent some time at Berkeley Buddhist Monastery. Marty will speak. Stan Shoptaw, who people know is our kind of photographer, has put together a slideshow. Paul's family will also be speaking. Probably others, people from the schools, people from the refugee program, because Paul participated in that, the 16,000 Buddhas as well. So we'll do probably another 30 minutes of talks, finally concluding with a dedication of merit. So the idea is to do it from 4 to 5 p.m. this Sunday. Locke just put the link.
California time.
Yeah, California time. So you have to look at time zone adjustments wherever you are. And I think Locke put the link up for people who want to join. This isn't like a public link like we're posting on our website, because clearly it's for those who might know Paul. But it's open. So if you have the link and you would like to attend, you're welcome to join in. Clearly he meant a lot to many people in our organization. So this is our kind of, in a sense, a send-off, wishing him the best. But also if people want to continue practicing on his behalf, they say in Buddhism, there's 49 days it takes for the consciousness oftentimes to transition. Okay, you want to say anything else, Marty?
No.
No? Okay.
Virtual Buddha Hall.
Oh, I mean our schedule? Yeah, we have our virtual Buddha Hall still going on all the time. So if you want to join in, morning ceremony, meditation reflections, a great Guanyin recitation. We're actually having something special tomorrow because there's been people who've joined together to recite the Great Compassion Mantra to help those in suffering during this difficult time. They've had about 10,000 Great Compassion Mantra recitations, about 380 people. And so they wanted to gather together at the monastery to dedicate the goodness of their practice to everyone. And you're welcome to join in as well. So it's 6:30 to 7 a.m. because people are all over the world in Asia, Europe, America. So we found early morning in California is probably the only time that everyone can join at some more or less okay hour. So if you want to join in, please log in. Same link, same Zoom link as our BBM online. You can either register on our form at the berkeleymonastery.org website. Yeah, that's where you can find it.
Actually, we get a new bodhisattva. I hadn't thought about the Avatamsaka, it's all these bodhisattvas. Now we have virtually connected bodhisattvas.
Yep.
Okay, we'll transfer in
Okay.
English.
May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace, with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Bow in respect to the three jewels.